Okay.
Se desconectó.
Uh-oh. Ya no fue.
Sí,
Ya no fue
se nos fue. Ah, no.
el consejero. He's coming back.
Sorry about that, but when I clicked off on the live streaming announcement, I was suddenly bounced off of here. Anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning to the defense of Jordan Grullón Penkova, and who will be defending his translation and preface to HR 51, a bill to create the Puerto Rico Business Development Bank, a translation from Spanish to English of Proyecto de la Cámara 51, Ley para crear el Banco de Desarrollo Empresarial de José Varela Fernández. And I'd like to, first of all, extend my gratitude, my sincere gratitude to Jorge Álvarez González and Melanie Kinch Pérez for agreeing to be readers at this defense or for this defense. I want to thank you very much because, you know, there's nothing you get out of this. No recognition, no remuneration. Well, I guess you could, no, you could put it on your CVs for sure.
Yeah. Also, you get a cool pic on Instagram.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yes, and you'll be recognized on the PGT website.
That's true.
So it's not entirely for nothing. Now, what happened? I see. Oh, here we are.
Yeah, you're still here.
Yeah, it's, you know, it depends on the platform, but you know, when you start closing things out. In any event, I'd also like to welcome whoever is listening in or watching this this podcast. So without further ado, I think what we'll proceed with is Jordan's introduction, and then we'll go on to have the readers provide their own feedback. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction. And I want to start off by thanking everyone involved in the process, for mainly the people who are probably watching out there. Without your support, I probably wouldn't have done it. And all of you contributed some way or another to the completion of the thesis project. I want to especially thank one of my many mentors, Rosalind Famous. She basically gave me the tools that I needed to tackle legal text. I can honestly say I cut my teeth with her in the real-time translation. So thank you so much. And last but not least, thank you, Professor Auerbach, because your feedback and your suggestions made the process much more easy. And it got a final product that was worth presenting. So thank you so much. The next thing I want to talk about, and to get the process rolling, is talking a little bit about the background of the creation of the bill and what the bill itself is trying to describe. So basically, the bill wants to rescind Act 22 of 1985, which is the act that created the Banco de Desarrollo Económico, or Economic Development Bank. He wants to create this, he proposes in the bill that he wants to create the Business Development Bank, as he calls it in the bill. And he wants to make this new institution an institution that has more uniformity in the processes of applying for loans. And he describes in the exposition of motives that he wants this institution to focus solely on, I don't know if solely is the word I would use, but he wants to focus mainly on small and medium enterprises. It's very interesting because I did my due diligence of doing research on the purposes of his motives to create this bill. And I could find very little information out there. I tried to see if there were any interviews or any documents that he provided us to support why he would create this bill now. So what I did was, and it's even more interesting because in the bill he mentions that one of the reasons he wants to create this is because there's currently a crisis in loan portfolios, which are dramatically decreasing. The interesting thing is that he uses data of 2013, and it only took me one small research into the Banco de Desarrollo Económico's page to see the latest financial statements of 2018-2019, which show that in fact there is a decrease, substantial decrease in their loan portfolios. I think it's more than 90% of a decrease. Mostly, they give the reason as to why there's been such a drastic decrease. It's basically because there's been a lot of charge-offs, and for those of you who don't know what charge-offs is, it's when you have an account at a loss, so they close it. I did a little hypothesis that this is what he meant and that this is why he wanted to create this bill. I think that the other possible reason is because he explains in the bill that with the name change of the institution, he wants to basically have the name be more related to businesses. That's why he wants to make it the Business Development Bank. But it's basically conjecture, and I guess that this is why one of the main reasons why I didn't talk so much about a background of the bill, because I couldn't find actual evidence behind what he was the purpose of or the true purpose of why he wanted to create this new institution and why he proposed this bill, aside obviously from the fact that he explains a little bit in the beginning of the bill. It's very interesting. The author of this bill is, as Professor Auerbach mentioned, José Varela, also known as Connie Varela Fernández. But it's even more interesting because I did some research on him, and he's been a member of the House since 1997. So I mentioned this because I want to talk. It's closely related to my next point, which is that given what the scenario of the economy in Puerto Rico has been the last couple of years, there's very little mention in the actual bill about the Financial Oversight and Management Board, which is, I think, crucial when it comes to the Puerto Rican economy, when it comes to creating new public institutions. So I tried to do some research on my end to see if there were any interviews or any specific comments from the Oversight and Management Board, but there were none. I went so far as to see if the Financial Oversight and Management Board had made any comments in the recent years about the Economic Development Bank, but there was also no recent comments. So it was very interesting because he's been a House member since '97. He uses data from 2013, but the bill was proposed in 2021. So it's definitely something to inquire in the future, because to me it seemed very interesting that there was either no mention of the Oversight and Management Board, nor any documents that they actually sustained a reason as to why he would propose this. And to my next point, I think one of the main reasons why this bill was not successful in passing, and hence why it did not proceed, is because one, loan portfolios of private banks, and I did my research, are steady. Even so, now in 2022, the three major lenders of Puerto Rico, which are private institutions, say they are consistent, that they are steady. So I think that could be potentially one of the main reasons. The other reason is, and I think this goes without saying, the bankruptcy process of Puerto Rico, and public institutions like PREPA, which is the Puerto Rico Power Authority. So it's very, very interesting that there was no actual information about that. Again, this is conjecture because there's no actual, I couldn't find any actual evidence, but I hope that what he was trying to do was have a public institution be the main lender for and the main provider of seed money to entrepreneurs. So potentially that could be the reason why he wanted to create this new institution, but I couldn't say for sure. The next point I want to go and talk a little bit about is some of the difficulties I had through the process of translating. I guess that the main one was the maintaining consistency throughout the entire bill. And we all know that there's consistency in a legal text is the most, or at least one of the most important aspects. So it was, I would have to say that for me, many words like, for example, business, corporation, empresa, compañía, presidente, ejecutivos, they were constantly repeated. So for me to be able to translate these words, I had to make a little chart on my end where I would, every time the word would appear in the document, I would have to write it down so as to try to maintain consistency further down, because I knew for a fact that it was going to be repeated down, later on. So, and even then I had some trouble, and sometimes Professor Auerbach would suggest some changes because of the repetition and the consistency in the text. The other aspect would be financial terminology, obviously, because the main purpose of the bill is to create this new institution, which has many processes for application and approval for an application and an approval of loans, the granting of loans, repurchase agreements, for example, which are very technical terms that I had to do some research, and I had to use some parallel texts to try to understand. And I quote, my preface contains sometimes the definitions of words from Spanish to English, because I tried to compare the definitions many times to see if I was actually translating it correctly. And like I mentioned before, the limited availability of information regarding the background of the bill was also a challenge for me, because one of the things that we are taught as translators is to do some digging of why the text is being written, to see if there's a specific reason why the author chose to do the text, or why he would use certain words. So it was kind of challenging, especially when writing the preface, to find information regarding background. I even remember writing background in one of the points, in one of the points that I wanted to go over in the preface. But when I started doing my research on the background again, because I did it first when I originally chose this text. And I did it at the end when I was making the preface. I couldn't find too much information. So that's one of the reasons why I decided not to include more background in the preface. And the other thing that provided some sort of difficulty for me was certain errors, certain ways that I would have chose. If I would have originally written the text, I wouldn't have chosen those exact ways of writing the text. Some of them I pointed them out. There were, for example, numerical mistakes in the numbering of the sections and the articles, and then there were some mistakes for example, I think at some point the number, and I'm not entirely sure what the number was, but it was like 60 million something, and 1 0 was missing. So yeah,
it was 60 billion.
60 billion, yeah. So 1 0 was missing, and
written out it was 60 trillion.
Yeah.
Because it's
So and thank you, Professor, because I think your eye is more keen, more observant, and you helped me out to catch 1 or 2 of these errors. So and then throughout the entire text, for example, I do remember off the top of my head that at some point he starts enumerating, or I wouldn't say enumerating, but mentioning certain processes, and he uses the word cambiar, enmendar, comma, enmendar, and that repetition seemed a little bit odd. I translated as change, amend, but they're synonyms, so the repetition seemed very, very odd. And further down the text, there's also a certain subsection where he talks about movable and immovable property, inmueble, mueble and inmueble, and he repeats the phrase twice. In the text I provided for you, I did translate that very similar to the source text, but I do want to let you know that I did correct it after I sent it to you, because it seemed very odd. And to be honest, I think it was worth taking one of the repetitions out. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Another change I made to the final product was to add more context, because and this is to maintain consistency throughout the text, was the fact that I wrote board throughout the text in many occasions. So I added board of directors as a change. Thank you, Professor Auerbach, once again for helping me out with that. I also changed surplus and capital because there's a section where they talk about certain percentages that the bank will gain through some accounts that they're going to be opening. And it talks about surplus and capital. I believe that the words in the source text are capitali sobrantes, and I use surplus capital in one of them. I forgot the end. And it's the reason why I did that is because surplus capital is something completely different. It's actually an account that corporations use to and raises on the issue of shares in excess in their par value. So it's a completely different term, and I wanted to make sure that you knew, mainly the readers and the future readers of the bill, that was already changed, that has already been changed. And another change I made, and this was my mistake, so I do want to point it out, and I don't know how it slipped, to be honest. I think because my process, the way the way I did the translation was I translated the text, and if I couldn't find something, I would highlight it in yellow. When I did the revisions, I would go back and fix whatever I couldn't translate at that moment. So I think I forgot to highlight that, because I do have it in my references that's the way it should have been translated, which is the Ley Municipal de Patentes. Mm-hmm. I translated that as patents, probably because in the original one, I translated it directly and then probably would have highlighted, and but probably I forgot to highlight that portion. I did do my research. I have the reference in my references that suggests that the term that I should have used is municipal tax licenses, which is actually a tax that corporations and public institutions are charged if they register in a municipality. In the case of financial businesses, is a 1.5% tax. So instead of translating municipal patents, it should have been municipal tax licenses, and I already made the change. So I wanted to let you guys know. And in certain parts, I also changed the use of acronym to abbreviation, because even though they're closely related, it's not the same. So in certain parts, I did change the word acronym for abbreviation because I thought it was of better use. So again, thank you, Professor Auerbach, for pointing that out. And I guess that as a closure, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the parallel texts that I used. And to close the presentation, I want to talk about why I chose to translate this bill and what I got from translating it. So some of the parallel texts that I used was, of course, Act 22 of 1985. Because it's one of the pillars to the bill he Varela Fernández presented. I did read the text. It's very interesting because in the bill he proposes, he never talks about exemption because the current the current Economic Development Bank has tax exemptions on the purchase of assets, and he never mentions this. So it makes me, again, this is all hypothesis, but it makes me wonder if that was one of the reasons why he wants to create this new institution, hopefully. But he never mentions it in the source text, so it's my assumption. It's not factual. And the other two I used were House Bill 9198 from Gregory Murphy. House Representative Gregory Murphy. He talks about, and I have it right here. He talks about the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. The reason why the reason why I used this bill and the next one that I'm going to mention, which is not a bill, it's actually a law now. Is because the first one, I did want to have something to base myself on to see how the Congress writes bills. And it was a good example because it was not a bill that proceeded, it was just presented. And the second reason, and I laugh because this was a back and forth with Professor Auerbach, was for the use of the word pecuniary. I did my research and he was kind of worried, Professor Auerbach was kind of worried that I might not be able to use this word because it was kind of outdated. So he wanted me to do some research to see if it was in current use, which obviously is a valid point. And I did do my research in the US Congress's webpage. And it is indeed still in use, and that's why I chose to use it, because it's very similar. There's a translation. The word they use in Spanish is pecuniario. So I did want to keep that word, so it remained the same. And the next text I used was Public Law 159, presented by Senator Marco Rubio. And this one was the source I actually used and presented in the in the thesis project as reference for the use of word pecuniary, because they're both the last two that I mentioned were very recent from 2021, 2022. So it is in current use, and I did want to point that out. So lastly, like I mentioned, I want to talk about why I chose this text and why I think it was what I learned from this process. The reason why I did choose to translate this bill was mainly because when I read it first, I thought it was a good idea. And after a while of processing the information, I started to understand how very little chance it actually had to become actually passing, because of all the reasons that I mentioned before. So it was very interesting because it did allow me to analyze the situation further, and it was a very interesting process for me. And I also think that in some ways it was very utopic, because he wants to make things very easy for entrepreneurs. And if they want to borrow money from institutions, I think he wants to condense processes. He wants one institution to provide consulting services. He wants to be able to provide in jointly with the Office of the Insurance Commissioner insurance for the new small or medium enterprise. So it was very utopic. It always looks beautiful in paper to want to take bureaucracies and make processes faster. But I guess that I gained a lot by translating this, not only because I got to practice legal translation, but also because I deep dived myself into the financial world, which I think is very interesting, very tedious at times, but very necessary for everyone. So those are the main reasons why I actually chose to translate this bill, and why I learned so much from the process. And I think that the last thing I would say from this presentation is thank you so much to everyone for your time. Thank you, readers, for taking your part of your day to read and be here in this presentation. And once again, thank you, Professor Auerbach, for all your input and feedback.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. And I'm glad that you mentioned those points as well. I would just make a suggestion that you include some of what you said right now in your preface, especially with regard to trying to research background and finding very little. And also, I don't think, I mean, obviously it's very easy to find out, but I don't think the Financial Oversight and Management Board is mentioned once in the text itself of the bill. Mm-hmm. And we discussed this briefly, that it's it almost there's almost something delusional about this bill. There's something that it kind of exists in an alternate reality. And I think that it might be wise for you to just discuss that a little bit. I mean, you don't have to get overly political about it in any way, but just the dead ends that you wound up hitting when you try to do research about one thing or another thing, whether it had to do with the Financial Oversight and Management Board, or whether it had to do with Connie Varela, or any of those aspects. Just a little bit of that would really be very helpful. And that's all I just wanted to say right now. But I would like to turn over the floor to our readers. And once again, thank you very, very much. It's great to see both of you again also. And so, Melanie, would you mind beginning the discussion?
Sure. And on your note, I precisely had a question as why particularly this text? So I agree with Auerbach that the preface should include something about why would you choose to translate a bill if why not an actually enacted statute? But I mean, obviously what you have presented gives you a real reason of why the importance of this bill and why your interest. Obviously, you already mentioned your interest in translation on the financial world, and also because this is a legal text. But that background seems very pertinent to presenting this, because if not otherwise, I had the question, what if this would have become a statute? Why would you choose to translate a bill rather than that? But it seems clear that you chose this because you knew it wasn't going anywhere. So I think that that gives you more thought into it than the preface suggests. And so, yeah, I agree with Auerbach. And on that note, my first question was precisely why this text. So that's done. The other points that I had is that your preface also doesn't necessarily show how much it's obvious that you do know after your time in the program. And I think it would be a statement to you and to the program as well to actually be able to put that in writing. The fact that legal and financial translation is kind of rigid, and what you had to do to make the document your own, and what type of research you did that you already explained in part in your introduction now. And what are these rules? Legal translation has very strict rules, and so does the financial world. So I think that a little more of theory, I guess, but some sort of background on what these rules are, that you know them, that you're aware of them, and when you decided to stray from them. So this is actually an exercise in your knowledge of the background that was necessary, and then how you actually went about deciding when to follow the rules and when not to follow the rules. And for example, there are, for example, to mention some of these legal translation rules, one of the things that you do mention in your preface is the difficulty with the structure of the bill, whether it be an article or sections or chapters. And it's a very legitimate question. There is no one way of doing this. I mean, every different system has their own, every different country inclusive has their own way of doing this. So I would have preferred to a little more exposition onto what were those other parallel texts, maybe some mention of your awareness of that you do mention. So I'm not that there are different legal systems, and you do mention that Puerto Rico is a mixed jurisdiction. So a little bit more on that, because it's very important when you're talking about legal translation. Financial translation, I mean, also would have some sort of differences in different countries, but I mean, maybe just to mention that because of Puerto Rico and its reality, obviously mentioning the Financial Oversight Management Board would also kind of require a mention about their financial terms that they're going to demand, and what is expected of translations in English. For example, I mean, I work with legal translation particularly, so most of the legislation that is actually translated by the official bodies that do translate the laws are basically the financial translations, because precisely that is the biggest demand. So awareness of Puerto Rican culture and this background of how Puerto Rican law is actually expressed, and in line with that, there are a few particularities in this text that I would mention, or at least here for the benefit of this discussion. The use of the word, the way the Puerto Rican law usually uses the word nación y país, when that's translated into English, I mean, it's a big decision. How are you going to present that cultural identity, or you're not going to present that cultural identity? And I would mention here for discussion that, for example, one of our professors in the program, Professor Álvarez González, his doctoral thesis has mentioned exactly how legal translation in English has an effect on how Puerto Rican identity is formed and how it can be changed. I mean, obviously that's not the focus of your translation, but it's not something to necessarily be looked over, even if it's just one or two mentions of how you would manage that translation, which you did keep. I mean, I do remember seeing country and
nation as well.
And nation, yes. So that's an important decision, and that I'm sure that you were aware of. That it seems that it was just a literal translation versus an actual pondered, very complicated decision, potentially. There are other things that you might actually include in, for example, the fact that a lot of terms or some terms are actually provided already in English, and it's kind of cumbersome how to eliminate it, that extra phrase. You can just simplify it, but then again, it would be a change to the text that would merit some sort of comments in your translation, in your preface. And concerning one of these other particularities of Puerto Rican legal translation or legislative translation, I don't know if it's obvious for many people, and I don't know if this is actually decided or it's just my impression. The fact that every type of number is usually followed in words, followed by a parenthesis with the numerical in it, that is something that I think is particularly related to Puerto Rico and maybe other civil law jurisdictions, because in my opinion, it has to do directly with influence of notarial law. You cannot write a deed with numbers. I mean, it is included, but it's in parentheses because all numbers have to be written out. So I think it could be superfluous, but again, it's a decision that if you want to keep, it would be worth mentioning that this is something very particular about Puerto Rican legislation that I don't think you would have seen it in any federal or state legislation. So the fact that you did decide to keep it merits some sort of explanation, because I don't doubt that these were difficulties or are these particularities that you had to face that you decided something. So, I mean, it's not a mistake. It wouldn't seem cumbersome for someone else reading it, but if this is a decision that you want to keep, then I think you should base your decisions a little bit more. And also, there are a few words that don't really exist or are not necessarily well used, or the translation is used a lot, but again, it's not a word in English. For example, instrumentalidad. I looked it in the dictionary and it doesn't exist, but all translations that I've seen in English for Puerto Rican legislation, they do use it. So the fact that you decided to keep it too it's also a cultural quirk or not. So it's worth, I guess, mentioning also the word permisología. That is something also that people use all the time, and I don't think it's actually a word at all. Yeah. So these are these cultural quirks that I think it would merit kind of, along with what Auerbach was mentioning about how Puerto Rican reality is, in the sense of how this legislation would not progress at all, and then these other particularities about how you decided to manage these cultural identities, I would suggest.
Just a note about instrumentality, it is a financial term though.
Is it?
Yes, and if you look, for example, in Investopedia, you'll find instrumentality of state. And it's exactly what we're talking about. They're institutions or agencies or departments. So it certainly is used, but maybe more in financial, as part of financial lexicon than legal in the United States.
Okay, so I think that's worth mentioning, because I don't think it's used so much in every type of legislation that is not necessarily financial. Instrumentalidad del gobierno, maybe it does actually mean that in every other, but I don't know.
It's weird because I'm not even sure whether it was taken from English.
I mean, I think that is a great question.
But it's so you didn't find it in, say, Merriam-Webster?
Yes, I did, but it didn't actually seem, let me see if I found it. Let me look it up. But it didn't seem to fit the use that I think it means. Instrumentality. It is the quality and state of being instrumental. Also means an agency.
That's it?
That's what Merriam-Webster Online is giving me right now.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, I mean, those are other things. Those are little things that, I mean, can make translation difficult and that would require you knowing a little bit more about the source text and where it's coming from, so you can make an informed decision with your translation. And also, this is just a comment about these legal rules of translation, that it's not necessarily an issue in your translation, but the fact that you have to be aware in any type of legal translation, the difference between legal commands and what is permissive and what is an authorization, that type of verb will completely change the meaning. For example, it's not the same thing that something would be mandatory, something must be done, versus something that's just directive, that it must be done, but there are no actual consequences if you don't, versus permission that allows for some discretion. So maybe the verb may would be the proper use, and other what would be authorized also kind of makes a reference to duties. So therefore it's not necessarily mandatory, but your awareness of these type of structures and verbs would give you more, it would make you seem more knowledgeable in the final presentation in your preface, because you do manage at least this part very well. I don't remember necessarily having any issues with your verb choices. So the fact that you are aware of these rules and that you have applied them well would be a testament to actually your knowledge throughout the program and how you have applied it in this project. And you did mention in your introduction the problem with consistency in legal translations, which is also very important. And on that note, I would probably kind of actually make reference to a couple issues in the text regarding that. For example, I think that throughout the bill in Spanish, the phrase that's reiterated is está facultado. But you do change that phrase throughout the text sometimes. So that's not necessarily a problem, because legal translation can be very boring in that sense without any type of lexical variations. But if the point of if a translation will be used for certain context, that could be a problem if, for example, there would be a controversy regarding the powers of the agency in a certain section, and then they use this word here versus another verb somewhere else, would become a discussion about the translation rather than the source text itself. So that type of decision, I would be very careful in that type of lexical variation. Other examples of that would be very well appropriate is what you do mention about businesses and companies. Sometimes it's important to be consistent, but maybe in those terms, sometimes empresa y negocio could be interchangeable. So in that sense, if a sentence is kind of strict and needs some sort of flexibility, then those type of terms, with awareness of their meaning, can be used in different senses. Mm-hmm. There is also, regarding that consistency, the word, the chair, the presidente del banco, you define it as chairman or chairwoman. I mean, you can say chairperson, but chair would also just be fine. But let me see where. I think it's when it's discussing the board. They mention, I think they're referring to board members. Mm-hmm. And you use the word chair or chair or chairman in that section. Yeah. And I think that's a mistranslation. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it.
That was actually one of the changes I made For the version I sent you guys, Professor Auerbach did pointed out that it was a mistranslation, so I already changed that. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing it up. But yes, I did make the change.
It's odd, but just speaking from my experience in financial translation, or these kinds of hybrid texts, I find that the business community is still very resistant to going with chair. I find that that's something that is more academic, and maybe you'll find it more in law, but not so much in the business community. It's usually chairman, and then we'll call this person chairwoman, kind of begrudgingly. Okay, we got to do it, because she's there. So it's interesting in that I think that business language evolves less rapidly in some cases than maybe legal language, or certainly academic language, which I would say evolves a lot more rapidly.
That's a reason. I would not be surprised.
Which is why, even though I hate to do it, I usually will say chairman, / chairwoman instead of chair, because I know that a client is not either going to say, what is this person doing?
Sitting.
Yeah.
But what about chairperson? What's your experience with that?
It's not really used that much.
Okay.
But I'll engram it later.
But see, that's a decision. I mean, these are things that if someone would decide to read the translation, they wouldn't necessarily realize the complexity of what we do. And I would more appreciate a preface that actually shows people that this isn't just plug and play. I mean, every word, every sentence, every structure has a purpose. And to finish, and before I give return to my colleague here, there is also, I don't believe that there is one right translation or one authoritative way of doing things. I think everything depends on who is your target audience, what is the purpose of the translation, who do you think will use it, and how. And I think if I knew clearly from the outset what you are expecting the user to manage this text, other things regarding formatting and your other decisions regarding terminology and would kind of clear itself out. For example, something as simple as the HR decision or the HB decision. You can use either. Obviously, federal legislation I looked up actually prefers HR, but many states, and in Puerto Rico included, the translations would always be HB, for example, for bills. So you mentioned in your preface that was something that you corrected using this, which is fine, but it's not necessarily something to be corrected. It's not necessarily wrong. So that would be something regarding format. Another thing would be just, for example, the choice to not use the line numbering that the billing does include. And that would make a difference in the sense if you had decided that this would be a document that would be used during a discussion on the floor at the same time that would be discussed in Spanish, then that line numbering and page numbering would be very important because it would help discussion on the floor of people who speak different languages. For example, and also if this were, for example, if this bill actually became an enacted piece of legislation, would your purpose be for a client to understand the terminology, or would this be the actual official translation of the act? And in that sense, if this is an authoritative text, then the need to actually research the names, the actual names of all these entities, the actual names of the statutes, because a law should actually make reference to the other official translations of the law. So in that sense, you would have practically no flexibility in deciding to rename something or make something more clear in that sense. I mean, so that type of focus and purpose of the translation would actually clear up potentially other decisions in your translation, especially maybe the choice of keeping or not keeping certain references that are civil law terms versus common law terms. And that would also include mention your awareness that you do recognize that the term obligaciones can obviously be translated to obligations or debentures, like you sometimes mention, but to recognize that that is a civil law term, and your choice to keep it or not keep it, or to use it in this financial sense, but not in the civil law sense, would actually show your knowledge of what you have learned and what you have to still learn, because I'm always learning regarding this. I mean, I also had to research so many things just preparing this. So I thank you also for inviting me, because at these times, every way of presenting yourself to a new piece of translation and other person's translation style is also kind of enriches my own way of seeing things and reaffirming or changing the way I do my own work. So thank you for considering me, and I'll give the space for Jorge and whatever afterwards. If there are other things that I think that I need to mention, then I'll jump in if he lets me.
Okay. By the way, Melanie, could you? I don't know if you were planning on doing this, but could you? Do you have a marked up copy that you can send Jordan of the text?
I do, but I would have to scan it because I have it in paper.
Oh, okay.
In any case, I made note of the things you suggested. So,
all right. If there's, but I'll tell you what. If there's anything else salient you could that you can think of, just write an email. Then because I don't think you should go through the problem of scanning anything. No. Okay.
I mean, there are some things here that I think that I don't want to discuss too much. I mean, I do have a few other things, but considering the time and I'm sure that I don't want to say all the things that I'm sure that Jorge might potentially have to say too. So, but yeah, I'll scan this. Yeah, I'll just send you. I mean, sorry, it's not necessarily searchable, I guess, with all my comments, but
don't worry. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. And by the way, I'm just gonna mute myself for a moment, but I'm listening in. So Jorge, if you would please take the floor and
Sure.
give us your feedback.
I will. I just need a second to open the door for my dog, que me lo está pidiendo. Vengo rápido, perdón.
But I mean, other than that, I applaud you for choosing a text that you admit that you don't necessarily feel comfortable in considering legal translation. So, I mean, I think that was a brave choice too.
Ok, chévere, perdonen. Lo otro es que había hecho mis notas en español, así que voy a hablar español, voy a hacer un poquito de los dos. Primero, quiero felicitarte, Jordan, porque, oye, lo hiciste, mano, lo lograste. Estuvimos hablando de esto ¿qué fue eso? Hace un año que dimos la clase, estoy pensando esta traducción y en verdad que me alegro mucho que entonces hayas podido terminarla y presentarla aquí para nosotros y ¿verdad? Un honor para mí que me hayas considerado para ser lector. Y lo otro es que, exacto, y haberte lanzado el charco no solo a una traducción jurídica, sino financiera, ¿verdad? Como dice que es quizás extra complicadito. A ver, o sea, me alegro también que Melanie haya hablado primero porque ella es mucho más organizada que yo en estas cosas y tiende a ver como más el macro y quizás en términos conceptuales pues organizó mejor la información para que te sea útil. Yo identifiqué algunas cositas, ¿verdad? Que vi en la traducción. Para estas cosas tiendo como que ir más al detalle y por eso pues me parece que fue bueno que haya empezado la compañera. Ella cubrió el asunto de ¿verdad? de la fuente. Y de hecho, tú lo mencionaste también en tu presentación de los textos paralelos que has utilizado, ¿verdad? Que lo mencionas en tu me parece que en la bibliografía aparece uno, pero exacto, sería uno que entonces en el prefacio, pues que quizás abundarán más sobre ellos. Porque, y esto tiene que ver con, por ejemplo, la traducción que yo hago a diario, que es obviamente jurídica, pero es, como dice la compañera, que es authoritative, right? Es de una institución que estamos diciendo cuál es la norma, entonces, en ese sentido, pues, tiene una historia de cómo se han hecho las cosas de literalmente décadas, siglos, y entonces las leyes acá tienen que estar en ambos idiomas, entonces hay muchísimos textos paralelos para estas cosas. Y entonces, mucho de lo que vi, porque en términos sustantivos, pues está, o sea, estás ponchado, como decimos, ¿verdad? Estás breando los términos como son correctamente, pero en términos entonces de quizás de formato, de cómo se tienden a... Porque, ¿verdad? Me dices que consultas un texto paralelo para cierta terminología, pero entonces, en términos del formato, por ejemplo, algo como la exposición de motivos, ¿verdad? Si vamos a cualquier estatuto, te va a hablar la exposición de motivos, y esas cosas están traducidas, ¿verdad? El título, ¿verdad? Que suele ser que yo tuve que buscarlo también porque yo me hubiese ido con otra cosa, ¿verdad? Que suele ser statement of motives, ¿verdad? No exposition. Entonces, como dice la compañera, si no está mal que obviamente exposition, porque, bueno, o sea, eso es lo que están exponiendo las razones, ¿cierto? Pero entonces hay que reconocer que hay una tradición de decirle de esta otra forma, y entonces quizás, if we're going to stray from that, pues vamos a decir, ¿por qué? Entonces, no solo es que yo lo decidí, no es not a whim, es que yo escogí esto por estas razones, y entonces también ¿verdad? Se lee más como una decisión que como que si fuera, ¿verdad? Algo que se te ocurrió y ya. Tienes algo bueno también entonces que hablas en el prefacio de tu decisión, perdón, de ACT, sobre law, ¿verdad? En la traducción. Justamente, ¿verdad? Porque cuando uno va al detalle de lo que es an act, ¿verdad? Es más formal, que pasó el proceso formal de legislación, mientras que el law pues, puede ser más general, y de hecho tenemos el law with the big L, right? Que entonces ahí estamos hablando de derecho, propiamente. Así que es más claro que cuando estamos hablando de act es una pieza legislativa. En ese sentido, pues está muy bien, que quizás tal vez una discusión breve de eso también, que hoy pues law también se puede referir al campo general del derecho, ¿verdad? Civil law, no, common law, contract law, ¿verdad? Y en act es una pieza de legislación. Otra cosa que vi cuando, ¿verdad? En el prefacio, cuando justificas decisiones de términos jurídicos, me gustaría ver que usaras entonces diccionarios jurídicos ¿no? para esa fuente, ¿verdad? No, o sea, en Merriam-Webster tiene definiciones de todo, porque tiene de todo, ¿verdad? Y está chévere, pero yo lo uso también a diario, don't get me wrong. Pero quizás podría ser como un punto de partida, entonces entramos al detalle con, qué sé yo, con un Blacks o algo así como más del campo. Cuando estamos hablando, obviamente, de términos jurídicos, igual que haces con los financieros, que te vas a los diccionarios financieros, nada más con esas cosas. Entonces, exacto, eso fue algo que vi en el asunto de terminología jurídica. Entonces, de nuevo, volviendo al detalle, que me da trabajo no leer así, I don't know. Es el asunto o sea, que nos mencionaste en tu introducción de un error que notaste, porque quizás en tu proceso de traducir, que traduces, y lo destacas de amarillo, las partes que no estás seguro, ¿verdad? Como un tipo de placeholder, para después regresar a eso. Yo hago exactamente lo mismo. Pero entonces, exacto, hay que estar seguro de que está todo marcado y ¿verdad? De cuando leas otra vez que tienes todo, porque por ejemplo, en la sección número 7, tiene, me parece que se supone que sean 5 incisos y lo que tiene son 3, ¿verdad? Se supone que sea de A, B, C, D, E, y lo que tiene es A, B, C, entonces empiezas con el tercero en lugar del primero. Que esas cosas pasan, porque estos textos son tan repetitivos que uno va viendo la estructura, pero entonces cuando hagas el proofread, ¿verdad? Hacerlo como con intención, porque por eso, no sé si recuerdas cuando hablábamos de que estabas pensando seleccionar este tipo de textos, te decía, pues, cuando vayas a escoger el texto, debes escoger algo que estés dispuesto a vivir con ese texto por mucho tiempo, ¿verdad? Porque vas a tener que leer y releer y releer y ¿verdad? Que no dejarte, que no se te canse la vista de mirarlo. Porque hay que mirarlo mucho, como, como pudiste ver. O sea,
Yeah.
ya no hablando que te anymore, pero hay que hacerlo,
Yeah.
¿verdad? Así
Yeah.
que, y cuando se hace, pues hacerlo con intención, que a veces uno empieza y todo, no sé, nos has tomado el café y pues esas cosas pasan, pero you gotta try to catch them. Y luego otro es, lo mencionaste en tu introducción, cuando hablan de los billions. O sea, yo fui a la fuente buscando la palabra billones, pero no usan la palabra billones, ¿verdad? Es que en los números aparece una cifra que son billones, porque entonces la estaba buscando, pero no sé si, o sea, según la vi, no me parecía que eran, o sea, los billions, sino que lo que tenía era, porque cuando dices que le falta un cero, me parece que es que tenía 2 ceros nada más porque eso eran los centavos, ¿no? Que
Ay,
lo
sí.
último era un punto, no una coma. Déjame ver si lo encuentro por acá
No,
déjame
no,
darle un find.
yo lo encontré y en efecto dice 60 millones. Dice 60
Correcto.
millones y después la cantidad está correcta, la cifra.
Right,
Ah,
exacto,
así que hay que hacer, eso fue un error, Jordan.
yeah. Ok, sí, porque lo miré varias veces y yo, no, o sea, tratando de ver ok,
This, that's also my oversight too, because I don't know why.
a mí me pasa, bueno, con los números se me juntan, I need to get, I don't know, porque te digo, a veces cuando yo tengo los números, por ejemplo, cuando estamos traduciendo los sellos en el tribunal, tengo que así a veces tapar, cuando hay muchos ceros, tapo los otros números para ver, para contarlos así físicamente cuántos son, porque no, se mezclan, mano.
Yeah, and this was a back and forth. It was not something that was like, and which is, to your point, you have to proofread this 1,000 times,
Muchas veces, mano,
because
sí,
we did proofread a couple of times, but
claro.
it was sort of a back and forth. And at the end, I also thought it was a mistake, because, and that's why I pointed it out. But yeah, originally I think I did write it as the source text said, and then changed it, and then it was
But you know, I mean, actually, that's not very much money, $60 million.
No.
If that's their surplus account is $60 million, it's a little bit frightening, I think, in fact, but maybe, anyway.
Sí,
So,
esa es I guess, pero to Jordan's point, ¿verdad? El tipo de empresa entonces quizás no está dirigido a una empresa gigante, la,
what
the bill, right? So,
can you do with that? I mean, it's like,
par de carritos de hot dog. Entonces, porque sí, volviendo a los millions and billions, cuando aparece en el texto, ¿verdad? Me parece que hace, you do a good job porque aparece que se lleva una cifra de 62 mil, 80 whatever millones, ¿verdad? Entonces, cuando tú lo traduces, pone 68 o 62 point, lo que sean los números, y eso, o sea, ahí está perfecto. O sea que, por eso es que me estuvo raro, ¿verdad? Porque ahí lo resolviste como es. Entonces, exacto, lo que se me ocurrió fue eso, que quizás vieron el punto como una coma, y pues, que eso ya entonces viene ahora las reglas nuevas son que lo que hacen es que eliminan las comas y los puntos, ¿verdad? Según
now
he
it's a
estado viendo que dejan un espacio y ya,
Mhm.
might be easier. Sí, porque es que en diferentes sitios significan diferentes cosas también.
y la pregunta que tengo es si van a tener esta cuenta de rédito, son rédito, ¿no? Y bueno, ese tipo de cuenta por solo 60 millones de dólares, ¿cómo pueden tener un portafolio? Bueno, si hablan de un portafolio de préstamos de miles de millones de dólares, o sea, esas cifras no cuadran.
Mm. A veces, exacto, y eso va a ciertas cosas, ¿verdad? Que también mencionó Jordan en la introducción, que a veces uno como que quisiera que la fuente estuviera redactada de otra forma, ¿verdad? Entonces, a veces uno como parte de entender lo que te están diciendo, y entonces ahí es que uno se da cuenta que el ejercicio de leer y entender también a veces tiene un poquito de predicción involved, right? You're like trying to anticipate what they're thinking as well. Entonces quizás ahí pues pasa ese tipo de cosas. Pero nada, eso lo había visto. Entonces, en términos de, exacto, ahí, volviendo al proofreading, ahí en alguna parte, no me acuerdo en qué página era, parece que tienes como la palabra predominantly de una versión anterior que la había separado con un guión. Entonces está todavía con el guión espacio y la última parte de la palabra, ¿verdad? Como eso. Pues, ¿sabes? Son detallitos ahí que realmente pues, son inconsecuentes al sentido, pero entonces lo ves and it makes it maybe look a little less polished than you'd want it to be, ¿verdad? Y uno quiere que suceda así como perfecto.
Exacto.
Un punto importante que trajo Melanie es el asunto, ¿verdad? de la uniformidad en el texto, ¿verdad? The consistency in your terms. Una cosa que noté también es cuando usa metalenguaje, cuando estás hablando de las palabras que significan cierta cosa, a veces lo pones entre comillas y a veces no. Es que uno puede hacer quizás ambas, ¿verdad? Si después que la destaques quizás con una cursiva o algo, pues puedes hacer eso, pero entonces si escogemos una, pues quedarnos con eso por ir para abajo, ¿verdad? Me gusta lo que hiciste en una ocasión con este asunto de la gestión, porque eso es uno de mis pet peeves, mano, que ¿sabes? Acá en Puerto Rico usamos gestión para sonar bien profesional, but that doesn't really mean anything, ¿verdad? Como, la gestión es una palabra vacía, ¿verdad? Entonces, ojo con eso, pero en una me gustó lo que hiciste, que fue yo creo que era como que decir the effect of, una cosa así, como que, déjame buscarlo acá porque me pareció, I thought it was a good choice. Effort, I think it was effort.
Yeah.
Exacto. Sí, en la página 32 de tu traducción es un subinciso 2. In its efforts to finance entrepreneurial activities, ¿verdad? En sus gestiones ¿verdad? Es como, ¿qué? Entonces, pues, por lo menos, ¿verdad? Ahí le da un poquito de contenido, que esa es una de las palabras que pues, o sea, tenemos que retirarla. Pero ahí está. Y entonces, exacto, la compañera habló de esto ya, de cuando hay un paréntesis, ¿verdad? Ya te están dando la traducción aceptada, pues podemos usar eso y ya quizás como ella sugiere, pues pones una nota y dice, yo no siento que estás modificando el texto porque, o sea, porque nosotros lo que estamos traduciendo es sentido, ¿verdad? Entonces, pues el sentido está ahí, ¿verdad? El sentido de la cosa es justamente lo que está en ese paréntesis, porque tú estás hablando en inglés. So that's it. Entonces, pues, sí, exacto, al final que hablas de mueble versus inmueble, pues ya eso, entonces, pues son los términos jurídicos que tradicionalmente, pues uno tiende ya a traducirlo de cierta manera, ¿verdad? Que cuando hablan porque cuando hablas de propiedad en sistema civilista, se divide en las cosas que están estacionarias, ¿verdad? Es que está ahí, una casa, un terreno, versus pretty much todo lo demás. Después viene propiedad intelectual, que pues whatever, pero entonces el asunto ese es mueble versus inmueble, ¿verdad? Entonces, en inglés estaríamos hablando ya quizás de personal property, en el sentido de que son cosas que tú puedes llevarte contigo, tu carro, qué sé yo, otros efectos, los muebles de la casa, el sofá es personal property, right? Versus,
Eso depende si estás utilizando, por ejemplo, personal and real property.
right,
Pero
que a eso iba con el inmueble,
sí,
que yo
pero
usaría eso también por el asunto, ¿verdad? De ahí viene el término de real estate, por ejemplo, ¿verdad? Que es como
personal and real property, pero también existe bienes muebles, immovable and movable property.
Sí, lo he visto. I've seen it. Sí, sí. Eso es cierto. Lo he visto.
Pero I would add to that, porque yo también lo había anotado. En la sección 15, cuando se habla, y estoy leyendo la traducción, including all mortgages on movable and immovable property, that made me think del CRIM. Y la legislación del CRIM se habla de real and personal property, no solamente, y creo que se refiere exactamente a eso, y incluso la traducción oficial de la ley sí habla de real and personal property. So, for example, at least in that sense, que creo que es una de las menciones que él dice, que ya había corregido. So, maybe in that sense, real and personal property would be the more. And again, if you decide not to use these terms, I think it's worth mentioning that you do recognize that these are civil law versus common law terms.
Yeah.
And that for one reason or another, you chose this versus the other. I'm sorry, I won't interrupt.
No, súper bien.
But actually, I just wanted to say that I think that that's a translational decision.
Sí.
It's very much a translational decision because for the number of times that I've seen, editing translations, and coming from various different kinds of jurisdictions, the movable and the immovable, completely accepted, and also real and personal property, completely accepted. So in terms of the translation that was done by CRIM, that was a decision that they made at the time, and so as to whether it represents the ultimate authoritative translation, I wouldn't say so. It's just their decision at that time. But because you have those two possibilities, there's no reason, and any lawyer in the United States is going to, of course, know and maybe even use movable and immovable property.
Sí.
So I think that the point is that's the kind of decision, for whatever reason that Jordan makes it, he should justify it in,
Exacto.
as you're saying, as you've both mentioned, there should be more of a justification for those kinds of decisions. If you have, another set of possibilities, why did you choose this one? And maybe it should really be, if you're going to green, maybe it really should be, but I don't think that either one is necessarily better or worse than the other.
No,
Definitely not wrong or right.
Yeah.
Right, depends on the purpose of the translation, and again, to be consistent, when you recognize what are civil law and common law terms, why you would keep one versus the other, and if you change from one to the other, then to be aware that you do recognize that that there are more than one possibility.
Yeah.
Y entonces, otra cosa que había notado es que cuando, ¿verdad? Inicialmente cuando en el texto habla de empresa, que lo tradujiste como business, entonces business como enterprise, yo inicialmente me chocó un poco, pero entonces más adelante lo vi cuando se usa en el texto propiamente, y dije, pues claro, con razón, ¿verdad? Porque entonces cuando habla de pequeña y mediana empresa, entonces se lee como small business, medium business, right? Que entonces es más como ¿verdad? El lenguaje que uno suele conocer de por lo menos estas cosas que son accesibles a gente como yo, no los otros términos financieros que son ya más, maybe, a bit over my head. Así que eso, ¿verdad? Ahí entendí esa diferencia. Pero entonces, sí, o sea, como dice Melanie, ese asunto, ¿verdad? Que you do have to be consistent, right? Pero entonces hay algunos términos que quizás puedes jugar un poquito con ellos cuando el texto te lo pide, cuando estás redactando ciertas secciones específicas que you can see can quizás esa parte no es una super norma obligatoria, que entonces ahí puedes moverlo un poco y que la definición de la palabra no es lo crucial, sino como que la idea de ella.
Mhm. Mhm.
Eso, entonces, I mean, pude notar algunas de otras cositas que son, like, you know, like pet peeves I have, como like bi-weekly, que está por ahí, ¿verdad? Cuando hablan de quincenal, que pues, I mean, que pues, ¿verdad? Para empezar, eso ya es ambiguo, cuando uno habla en español también de bisemanal, que no sabe si son 2 semanas o 2 veces en semana, pero a fin de cuentas, el máximo de semanas que son, si son 2, pues son 14 días y no los 15 de la quincena.
Mhm.
Así que siempre que a mí me sale quincena, pues yo pongo every 15 days, just, para asegurarme que, ¿verdad? Que tengo esos 15 días,
Mhm.
porque son, ¿verdad? Es los 15 y los 30.
Mhm. Mhm.
Pero, ya, estar pendiente de cositas. En una, yo creo que fue en la página 35 que hablan de seguridad alimentaria. Me parece que tiene food safety, and I'm not sure that's what they're talking about, sino de food security versus insecurity, de tener acceso a alimentación versus no si la comida está envenenada, ¿verdad? ¿Verdad? Que son cosas diferentes. Pero nada, eso es, yeah, la parte esa de leer y releer el texto, que ya uno llega un momento que ya ni lo ve. Por eso es bueno tener un montón de tiempo para poder hacerlo. I mean, it took me long enough. Y yo creo que, o sea, en términos de mis notas era eso, porque sí, como te digo, yo tiendo a ir más al detalle que la compañera, which is, I guess, why she is who she is.
Para bien o para mal.
Para bien. Así que, sí, yo creo que esas son las notas que yo tendría
Thank you.
por el momento.
Jorge, can you possibly send your notes as well, or?
Sí, yo lo tengo como comments at the margins, así que, yeah, I could do that, sure.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sí, lo que voy a hacer es que las miro otra vez, porque sometimes I have like knee-jerk reactions, so I'm going to look at them again and make sure they're all right, porque de hecho hay unas cuantas cosas que hoy mismo con tu presentación aclaraste y fue como que, pues claro, está bien, muy bien, sí. Entonces, pues no hay que seguir hablando de eso, pero sí, lo envío, ¿cómo no?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I think yes, Luis just sent me a note, but I think we're ready now perhaps to dismiss Jordan for a short period of time while we discuss the thesis amongst ourselves.
Sure.
And so, Luis, I think we have deliberated not overly deliberately, but we have decided that the obvious effort, very tremendous amount of effort is there. And also you did a lot of research, but you don't reveal as much research as you could in your preface. So, and we've had this little discussion as well. So I think that, with adding certain things which were discussed today, defense, and also making a couple of corrections, then it will be tremendous. But we want to congratulate you, and we've decided to award you a grade of no fallacy. So
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Jordan. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very humbled. I'm really appreciative of all the efforts because it was a tedious and complex process. And like I mentioned before, you do have a keener eye than I do. I'm just an amateur on this. So Thank you so much for everything.
Yes, but you know, we what was noted was that, you know, you do have a love for financial translation, but you got really deep into the legal part here. So,
Yeah.
I mean, which is, you know, very brave. And you know, you managed to come out quite well. So, but a little bit of tweaking here and it would be tremendous. So, you know, and I know that Melanie and Jorge will be very glad to give you, you know, their particular insights, you know, in
Yes, please.
Corrections or notes or comments. Okay, I think I'm gonna say goodbye now, and but we don't go away because we have to take a photo.
Oh, I gotta fix my mustache.
I don't know what to do. It's so dark here.
Iba a prender la luz.
But in any event, okay.